And my huge apologies to your 5-year-old if I'm interrupting some Jurassic World stuff, because there's that fun game where you like build the Jurassic World park, right? And
Exactly.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
that's pretty fun. I
Yeah.
played that with a friend's kid the other day. Well, thank you so much for coming, and actually not even on the day that we talked about.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a lucky chance that I'm inside and not outdoors in the woods or something, because that's how I
um
usually spend my weekends.
understood, understood.
Uh,
Well, hey, thank you, and let's start then and use your time. So for the first thing, could you tell us a little bit about your academic background? How are you uh,
yeah.
coming at a find like this?
Um, I ask myself the same question every day almost, because I started off within the onomastic sciences, so that's name research, and particularly place name research. That's how I started my career as an academic, studying place names, particularly interested in place names of the pre-Christian religious type. So my master's degree was on pre-Christian sacrificial groves in
Hmm.
Scandinavia. Um, but the reason why I got into place name studies was because it was the only subject at my university at the time where I could go into the deeper etymology and deeper history of the Scandinavian languages. So I've for a very long time had the interest of historical linguistics. Um, and through the years I've been um, trying to have good relations to runologists and archaeologists and lots of people within the relevant disciplines when it comes to runic finds. And over the past few years, sometimes there's been runic finds where the runologists have asked me to have an opinion about names that uh, very often runic inscriptions have names. So I've been asked to give suggestions of etymologies and so on.
Okay.
And in this case, uh, I was lucky enough to be brought on board on the project and in its entirety. So I was brought on uh, quite early, almost. Well, I first got to hear about the find a year ago, and then after a few months, Krister at the runologist at the Cultural History Museum in Oslo brought me on board to just work parallel with her on the reading the runes and trying to figure out what do they actually say in terms of Proto-Norse language.
What did you see when you were first brought in about this find? What can you give us kind of a capsule description of the find?
Uh, I have never seen anything like it. Um, when I got the first photos and the 3D scans that had been taken at the time, uh, I could see a lot of lines, uh, not very deep incisions compared to what we would generally think of when it comes to runic inscription on stones. You would usually think of fairly deep furrows where the carver has been properly carving it in. But these were very narrow, thin lines, not very deep, like if they had been using a knife and perhaps in some cases maybe just a needle.
Hmm.
Um, and they were all over the stone. Some lines were clearly runes, some other lines were not so clearly runes, maybe. could be runes, and some were clearly not meaningful at all. And at first glance, it was really difficult to see how many inscriptions are there. What's the inscription here? But one of the inscriptions seems to sort of be the center of it all, and it's the 8 runic word, which might be Idiberug. It might also be Idiberun, because the last rune is, well, it's not very clearly a G rune. It could also be an oddly carved N rune. So sure. There's everything I'm saying about about almost anything here is, it might be rendered later on because it's a work in progress still. So those were my first impressions. And
these inscriptions were found in association with a burial site, is that right?
Exactly. The reason why they found it at all was because they were excavating 4 graves in a place where there's going to be a train line, so railway crossing. They're building a new railway, and it's gonna go over these 4 grave mounds. So they were excavating these, and when they excavated them, they found that there was also what we call in Norwegian a flat grave, which in general have no indications above the ground that there's an actual grave under here. So they started digging that as well, excavating that, and as they got into the a bit deeper into the layer, they found this stone, a nice little slab of sandstone, that, you know, they could see it clearly means something. Maybe they thought maybe it's the marker of the edge of the grave, because there was a similar on the other side of the grave, so it might be, you know, sort of boundary stones. And it was in an undisturbed context. So they're able to say that, oh, this stone has been here since the rest of the grave has been put here, because there's no disturbances at all. But they didn't actually see the runes when they were excavating this place. They brought the slab back to the museum, and it was only then under their artificial lights that they actually could see some symbols. These were the field archaeologist. Judita Servalska was the leader of the excavation, and she was also the one who noticed these carvings when they got back. And that's when they contacted Krister Silmer, saying, is this something? And she could confirm, yes, this is absolutely something. But the important thing here is that they didn't actually even notice the runes. And the runes were facing down when they found the rock as well.
And if it's so faint, do you think that it was that faint when it was interred?
It seems so. It seems that there's no withering in a way here. So it's quite clear that it's always been this weak, so to say, or certainly not very clear runes. Maybe it was meant to not be seen. Bearing in mind that it was face downwards. We have at least another example of that I can think of, the Oppedal stone, which is considered to be a bit later, but dating rune stones is in general difficult if you have don't have the undisturbed context like we did here.
And I mean, it makes me wonder, of course, at this point, I'm speculating, so I'll be brief, but did the inscriptions have nothing to do with the grave, and they just wanted the stone, right? And the stone
that's a possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So was it?
We don't.
sorry.
Yeah, we don't know whether the inscriptions have anything to do with the person that has been buried, and the person has not been properly sexed. We don't know whether it was a male or a female, and so we're suggesting that, well, it could be a female name, this Idiberug, Idiberun, but yeah, there are a lot of ifs here, and it certainly could be that they wanted just 2 boundary stones and they happened to pick one that happened to have runes.
And so is it just the one stone that has inscriptions on it?
Well, the bigger one was the one they noticed at first, but later on, when they went back and went through all the stones, they actually also noticed that there was another stone with incisions on it, and these incisions, we could confirm, are runes. And so this second stone it's broken in several pieces. So we have 4 pieces that can be puzzled together. And some of the runes are very easily readable, but the middle of the inscription is challenging to read. But it certainly starts with ek, meaning I, and it definitely ends with the word runo, which is the singular form of the rune. So something did, or yeah, we're lacking a personal name or a noun maybe, and a verb between there. And we have we're pretty sure that we have the last runes of the verb. It ends with do, which is the first person singular. I did. It concurs with the inscription starting with I. So we have 2 stones, datable stones, and I hope we'll be able to read the entire inscription on this second stone, because it actually looks like a very good sentence following the a formula that we see later on in inscriptions in the Elder Futhark.
I blank fahido runa or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. It could very well be the verb fahido.
And so both of these stones are found in the same. Is it Flathaug? Is that the flat grave, flat mound?
Flatgrav. Yeah.
Flatgrav. Okay. Yeah. And other artifacts in association with them, or
there is a let's see, was it a fibula in the flat grave, an Augen fibula, and in the other graves there are also other artifacts. There's a spindle, and there is a spur for the heels for a rider, so foot spurs for the horse riding. And let's see, what was there? Was something else as well? I forget. But in the flat grave there was also the skeletal remains after a cremation. Okay. And so it was, the osteologists are able to determine that it's a fairly young adult, but the sexing of the person has been challenging, so it's inconclusive for now.
I want to get to talking about the text here in a moment, but we have a couple more questions establishing some of this context. Lorianne asks, how did they date the site? What was it, carbon dating of the organic remains?
It's possible to date the artifacts by topology. So the topology of the artifacts are Roman era.
Okay.
So through that, you could date it to maybe sometime before so BC, maybe a few decades BC, and up until 400 AD.
Pretty wide.
Yeah, it's quite wide. And there are also some artifacts that could be dated even further up in time, so into medieval times, maybe, if I'm not. Yeah. So it's quite wide, but the charcoal can be carbon dated. And the charcoal is, it's based on the charcoal dating that we say year 1 to 250.
Okay.
But the skeletal remains of the person in the flat grave can be more narrowly dated to 25 AD to 120 AD. So within that time span is likely that the person has lived. And of course, there are a lot of people knowledgeable about dating skeletal remains will bring up stuff like the reservoir effects, and if a person has been eating seafood, a lot of seafood, they will generally seem, well, the C14 and C13 dating will be a bit earlier. So that could, a lot of people have been speculating whether this person could have been on a very maritime diet. But I would want to stress that the leader of the project, Steinar Solheim, dating is one of his, well, I'm using his words here. If there's anything I know, it's dating. So he's pretty comfortable with saying that we have this dating within 1 to 25, and well, not 25, but year 1 to 250. That's our dating at the moment.
And Rambach asks, all the graves in the area seem to be roughly contemporary, or is it?
Yes, they are indeed very contemporary. Yeah.
Okay. Because we're both text people, I'm going to move on to some text questions. This 8-letter inscription that can be most clearly read. What is your take on this Idiberug or Idiberug? What?
Yeah. My take on it is that there are so many possibilities. We've presented a few in our revelation of the stone, because it's when you go to the press about these things, the press generally likes to have one interpretation of it, but in reality, it's gonna be we'll have several. It might be a woman's name, it might be a male's name, it might consist of the name element that would be equivalent to Berg, so Berg, or it might be connected to the bear form. Yeah, that would be equivalent to the English word for bear. In Scandinavian, we generally use the word björn for bear, related as well. It could even be a word that is related to the Scandinavian word for bear. So there are many possibilities here. But it is, to me at least, it seems pretty clear that it is a personal name. It does not look like a fragment of a sentence. It could be a name or a noun, but it's a bit odd to just have a noun. If there's a noun as a singular piece of an inscription, it generally is the word for the object that you have the inscription on. So my assumption for now is that we're dealing with a personal name.
I think that's perfectly reasonable. I saw there was an interesting article I think Klaus Johann Myhrvold wrote where he denied the idea that it was a name based on I think his argument was just that the "eth" or "id" element wasn't used in names. But then actually someone on my Patreon, who I only know by the nickname Snow Raven, said that actually Idiberug is an attested modern Norwegian name. So you...
I'm not sure if it's attested in Norwegian, but it's certainly attested in Icelandic, and if I'm not mistaken, as well in Swedish.
Okay.
So it is an attested name, yeah.
Is Bjorn attested? Because I could see, again, with the G-N confusion, I could see that being a possibility.
I think not, no. But I would like to comment whether a name is attested or not isn't necessarily a criteria that we need to use to back our theories, because we're talking about possibly the oldest runic inscription. We have it's what happened there?
I don't know. It's probably from somebody else's audio.
Right. So we don't have a lot of texts to compare with from the same time in Germanic-speaking world. And to be honest, if a name Idbjörg is attested in, let's say, Iceland in 1700 something, I think the likelihood of it being the same name that's gone on as a traditional family name in that particular family for 1700 years or 1500 years, it's unlikely. It's more the question of compounded names that can be put together in different ways and just happen to be put together in this particular way for Idiberug or Idiberun or whoever it was, in maybe in the grave, or whoever this name refers to on the Svingerud stone.
And it occurs to me that we don't necessarily subject other names preserved in Elder Futhark to this analysis, because I don't think we have a modern cognate of we was or wo the redas, but we accept those as names. So yeah, I see. Maybe I'm being too soft on him because he writes Ninorj. But
it's fine. We're quite happy to receive all these good ideas out there.
Do you have a clear image of this inscription that you could show us, maybe by sharing screen?
Yes, I think I do. Let's see if I can find it.
I could probably pull one off of a news story or something, but I thought you might have a clearer image. Because part of what I wanted to look at is some of the possibilities here. I'll type something in the chat while you're doing that. So the last rune in this probably name, there is some question about whether it is G or N. So I'll just type those in, Elder Futhark, in the chat for you to see. And the problem basically being, is it kind of a slanted N, right? Or is it an X? And it can be very hard to tell the difference between those. And and I had seen, maybe it was you who mentioned that already. But when I had seen the inscription, I read it as a G. But no, I'm now realizing, yeah, if it is an N, it still gives very good sense, because you're right, it could easily be the bear root, because you even then have the U that causes the breaking of bear to björ. So it could easily be that. Yeah, I see what you mean.
So here are the incisions that are the clearest on the entire stone. Clearly an I, a D, another I, and this odd little thing that looks like two bees stacked upon each other. Very interesting.
Have you ever
And
seen that elsewhere?
the lighting here, never seen anything like it. Very, very interesting kind of thing. Very playful and interesting.
Yeah, I've seen S's like that, right? S's with several
Yeah,
bows.
and we also have S's with the same amount of zigzags. So
Okay.
an S just without the big line on
Mhm.
the left.
I haven't seen a
Um,
picture of that, but that's interesting. Okay.
yeah. Yeah, the R actually does have a clear line here as well between the. Yeah, but it's an interesting R because it doesn't connect back to the main staff.
But I've seen
So
that
it
too, right? I mean, that
yeah,
strikes
yeah.
me as a very early feature in a way. I
We
guess.
I've seen it on bracteates, an example. So they're from typically we would say the 400s.
Mhm. And
So
if you,
it's something that occurs.
I don't know what your stance on the Meldor fibula is, but some people have read one of those letters as an R that right to left, and I can see it. I'm trying to remember. Um, I'm sure I could dig up an inscription that has one of these weird R's that looks like a U, but anyway, I'm interested in that just because it does strike me as impressionistically kind of early.
Mm, yeah, and there's no doubt that this is early, and this is the rune in question of whether it's a G, because when you look at it this whole inscription at the moment is a bit tilted. So here it looks like it could be more an N, maybe. But it's also, the N would generally start upwards and go downwards in the same direction as the reading. And also the crossing staff is very long compared to what you would expect from an N.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, very interesting little thing. And then following this are very shallow incisions of something that, well, the next rune, it's very difficult to see here. It's here, and it is an upside down algae rune. So it's the 15th rune, the one that would usually be transcribed as Z
Okay.
in English, and the big R traditionally when we write Scandinavian about it.
Okay. I have not seen that.
No, exactly. It's very difficult to see, but this is the whole. I think it was Krister who said that it sometimes looks as if a person has been imitating another person on many of the lines in this on this stone, and this looks like it could be that there is this upside down algae rune, and it's impossible to see here even for me. But there's another B rune with the four vowels here.
I can just see a
And
couple
then there might
scratches of it.
yes, and then there might be two more rune-like symbols, but where we can't be really sure if it's are they S's or are they B's, or so it seems like this part is not a part of this inscription,
Mhm.
both because of mainly it being consonants, but also the distance between this last N or G rune and this upside down algae rune, and the fact that they're very shallow, made with possibly a needle or something very thin. Um, so it's not made by the might be the same inscriber, but it's certainly not made at the same with the same tool and at the same flow of writing.
Can we talk about two other rune shapes while we have this image up?
Yeah.
So the U is interesting to me because you don't have the kind of classic stave with a descending bow, but this, it does look to me a little bit like the U on Hjörlevík, which has more of that tent shape.
Upside down V. Yeah.
Also the D, I'm struck by how classic it is. Sometimes on early inscriptions you get weird boxes and incomplete pockets, and it's a funny combination to me of what you would sort of think are really textbook looking runes and some really weird outliers.
Yeah, exactly. The D runes are very pretty on this stone, and some of the Ds, I think there are 2, maybe 3, depending on how we. So already then I can say that 2 of the D runes look exactly like these, and then there might be another one that's. Is it an M rune or is it a D rune? It's a bit difficult to say. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you very much for showing us the image. I think that really helps both clear things up and remind us what some big questions are. So there's that's the most clear inscription you said too, and then there's also one that begins Ek and ends Runo.
Yeah, on a different stone.
And how much is missing between that? How many letters would you say?
Well, we would have room for a very short personal name or nomen, or a noun or a personal name, and a verb of not that many. It could be faihido. It would make sense that it would be faihido, and the runes that we can see and partly see looks like it could be faihido. But when it comes to the nomen, it's I'm crossing my fingers that our further analysis will make it clear. And I can't say I feel secure that we'll have a good reading or perfect reading in the end, but I feel somewhat secure. Very hopeful is probably the best word. Yeah.
Okay. And do you have an image of that? I don't think I've seen any images of that inscription.
I don't have that here, no, but I could send you. I think I have a fairly good photo of it that I could send you. I hope I'm not promising too much now, because I mean,
if you do, you do.
If you don't, if I do, I'll send it over. Yeah.
Okay.
But the inscriptions on, or the piece of stone ending with runo is also on display from today on, and the same with the big slab of with all these runes. They're both on display in the Museum of Cultural History in Oslo, and I'm pretty sure there'll be a fairly good photo somewhere if I don't have it here.
And by the way, that public display lasts through when? Is it temporary?
And it's very temporary, so it'll be about a month, maybe. Yeah, the last days of February will be, I think, the end of the display.
All right. Well, if anyone is anywhere close to southeastern Norway, that sounds like
I would recommend going and see it, just to see how difficult it is to see anything on the stone. In itself would be incredible, not to mention the the wildness of what kind of find this actually is.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me, you know, eye flights to Oslo, like, um, and then there's another inscription that I saw a mention of, and I think I saw one photo of that just looks like it's the first three letters of the Futhark.
Yeah.
So like someone started writing it out and stopped, right?
Yeah. So that's also the second most prominent. It's the runes are very big compared to all the other runes on the stone, and they are fairly deep and made with a tool that is it's difficult to say which kind of tool it is. Maybe a knife. Could be blunt knife, could be a sharp knife, but certainly something with a certain width. So it's more prominent, and it's very clearly an F and a U, and looks like a thorn as well. So the beginning of the runic Futhark order of the alphabet, which is insane because that probably means that the order of runes are already set.
Right. Right. I was noticing that myself because I think whatever your opinion about the origin of the runes is, and I'd be curious what your thoughts on that are, the hardest thing to account for is the order.
Yeah.
But here we have that order, at least implicitly, in what might be the oldest thing that we have written in runes. So it's already there.
It's this is one of the things that have been the most difficult about keeping the secret for a year, is that I've wanted to talk about this with so many different people because it's so incredible, and there are so many possible implications of some of the details here, and it's
Are there other implications you're thinking of that we haven't asked about? Because I'd be very interested to hear what you see here that perhaps I'm not picking up on.
Yeah, so this is just a wild theory brought to me by Judita, who was the excavation leader, who said that, well, if this represents a tradition or a way of making runestones that was fairly common in the early days, and when I say this as representation, I mean smaller stones with not very clear incisions of runic inscriptions, made in and buried and laid on top of and in context of graves that otherwise are just flat graves, or maybe it could be burials in general, but that would mean if it's flat graves, we don't know if there's a grave there. When we're walking for our walks, we don't know whether we're walking across a field of flat graves. But even in grave mounds, if it's been excavated in, say, 60 years ago, when you would have the expectation that a runic inscription is something that you would very clearly notice, particularly if it's a rune stone, and you don't have the correct lighting. I mean, even this find was only discovered under artificial light. So there are many details here that, you know, if this was a normal way of making rune stones in the 1st century, we quite possibly have a lot of stuff that's been overlooked already, difficult to find, and the potential of many future finds, because now anyone who's going to excavate a grave mound or a grave field of graves in any kind of type, they will think of this and try to double and triple check the stones that might be there.
Absolutely. So in fact, we may be sitting on a gold mine we haven't even ever noticed.
Precisely.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thought. I'm also fascinated by just how ambiguous the real dating of this is, because I mean, sure, you can carbon date the organic remains, but also if this stone was carved before, if it's basically graffiti and then the stone was just reused by someone who didn't even know it was being carved on, there's nothing to say that the inscription couldn't actually be quite a bit older than the organic remains. You could never prove it, but it's an interesting thought. And in a way, I think it really kind of casts more ambiguity on just how old the runes are. Do you have, just as I'm curious what camp you come down in on the question of the origin of the runes, and whether you think this has implications for that question?
It probably will have some implications. Certainly to the ones who are in the camp of saying, well, this is certainly not purely from the Latin alphabet. It'll be water for their mills, as we say in Norway. But when it comes to my own opinion, I'm not sure if I've ever had a very clear and blunt opinion about it. A lot of the letters look like they quite obviously derive from the Latin alphabet. And some of the runes that don't clearly come from the Latin alphabet could be, there are good arguments. I think it was maybe Henrik Williams who had who made this really good article where he explained all the runes as with their origin in the Latin alphabet that I quite liked. I mean, it could make sense, but I'm not entirely convinced that they all come from the Latin alphabet. And I think in one of your videos, you also stressed the whole thing with the O rune, the placing of the O rune at the end of the whole Futhark, the shape of it, and a lot of other details. I mean, I first started thinking about this when I became aware of the Negau helmets, Germanic language in Slavic area with Etruscan letters. Very, very interesting, and just makes you have all these ideas of this whole mishmash of cultures and the spawning of writing system and so on.
Yeah, first of all, I'm flattered by the notice of one of my videos, but I'm one of the weirdos who's convinced that it's, I'm not sure if it's some weird. I don't think it's from Latin. I think it may be influenced by Latin later, but I think that it's from some otherwise mediated Greek outfit, whether that be Etruscan or North Italic or whatever. I think there's just too much weirdness. Part of it is the direction of writing thing, right? Latin is always left to right, whereas you get, all the strophodon and right to left stuff in Elder Futhark that just, to me, looks like if you're coming from Latin, why wouldn't you just copy Latin more faithfully?
Yeah, well, the only way to explain why they wouldn't just copy it, I think, would be because they really needed to emphasize that they are not Roman. These are Germanic people, I mean, they love the Romans, and I think probably also love to hate the Romans, but they import so many styles and gold, and everything just comes from Rome into the Germanic areas and influences the Germanic elite. Bracteates being a brilliant example of how medallion or solidus, the picture on the solidus becomes the mixed together with Germanic king ideology and iconography and yeah, looks very interesting and gets runes on them as well. And so it's a big question, and I have decided not to have a very strong opinion about it. But you know,
Okay.
it's certainly a very interesting thing to contemplate.
Well, and I thought it was an appropriate time to ask about, because obviously this finding is going to be water for the mills of people like me who occasionally obsess about this question.
Yeah.
We've taken about an hour of your time, by the way, on a day that you did not intend. So if you need to go anytime, you know, just let me know.
I will. Yeah.
But if you have a little bit
I
more
can.
time,
We can continue for a bit. Yeah.
okay. Cameron reminds me in the chat, one question several people have asked is what language you would call this, right? Whether you would call this early Proto-Norse, late Proto-Germanic. Do you have an opinion about this?
Yes, I probably do. I think I'll probably go more into it in our article or articles when it or they come, depending on how the shape of it will be. But if we were to read the word Idiberug as the two last runes being switched, it would read Idibergo. And that would be a very typical nominative female or stem in Proto-Norse, where the Proto-Germanic would have the O ending, so not the U ending. So that could be an indication of calling it Proto-Norse. But of course, this goes into a whole discussion of when West Germanic splits off North Germanic, and whether you can say that the early runic could also be the origin of West Germanic languages. But for now, I think we don't have conclusive evidence in these inscriptions to say it is Proto-Norse and not just Proto-West, Northwest Germanic. However, it's found in Norway, and it looks like other runic inscriptions found in the Elder Futhark in Norway. So I don't have a problem with calling it Proto-Norse, just because of that.
And in fact, it's interesting to me how you find Elder Futhark inscriptions that, and of course, it's so hard to date most of these, but you find some with, you know, diphthongs in unstressed endings, right? Yeah. The famous instances of AI, versus others that have a monophthong there, the E. Yeah. And it's difficult to tell whether the ones with the diphthongs are actually older, or if there's some regional difference, or if some people are actually consciously writing some kind of archaizing language.
You're raising a very interesting question there, particularly because some of these diphthongs are on the bracteates, which are supposed to be from the 400s, maybe end of 300s. So that's fairly late to have this archaic unstressed syllables with diphthongs. But yes, it's all super interesting. When does the nominative z disappear from West Germanic and so on? It's a big question.
Huge questions. Pam also asks about whether, and I think this is hard to answer definitively, but is someone practicing rune writing on these stones like we practice out writing the alphabet when young? Because there's all these sort of playful looking features or light looking features. Does it look like a practice tablet to you? Do you think that's plausible?
It is plausible. It certainly can give that impression. And in particular, when it comes to the incisions that are made with something that looks like a needle. When it comes to Idiberug and Futh, I think it's very clear that that's not practicing. The same with on the side of the stone, there's also a long inscription that also does not look like practice. But the other lines look very much like they are, yeah, trying to repeat the runic forms of the other inscriptions. There's one of the inscriptions with the more shallow lines and thin lines that look like it could be a genuine inscription over maybe a few words, maybe between 3 and maybe 5 words, depending on how we would how we would read the inscription. But
it's almost like it's such a good rock that even though someone had scratched a bunch of crap on it, someone decided to write a real message on it anyway.
Yeah, very, very perfect, the perfect slab to use in there. But the area, I mean, this type of stone is very common in this area, so it shouldn't be difficult to get new stones if you needed good stones for that type of writing. It's not just because they had this unique, perfect thing to write on.
There's been a lot of questions, so I'm probably not hitting everything exactly, and I'm trying to kind of keep a flow going. But Payson asked something that I gotta say is a really good question. Is there anything more exciting to come from this? I.e., you just mentioned another inscription in the side that you can't tell us about right now.
No, I think the answer is yes. There will be more to come.
Okay.
We've decided to go public with some of the things, and for several reasons decided to keep some of the other things for our academic publications.
Okay.
And there are several reasons for that. One being there are so many ifs in many of these inscriptions. When it comes to the longer inscription on the side, that is mainly an inscription with most of all consonants. So interpreting that inscription will be, I think I don't want to do that. I don't want to force my ideas of where to put the vowels to force a meaningful inscription. That's not how I want to do runology. So well, there might be that we can say, well, there are some vowels, so maybe some parts of the inscription can be interpreted as some words, but not a whole sentence or utterance in a way. But other than that, yes, there are more things to come in the publications that will come later on. Okay. Hopefully not too long.
And if one were to show up in Oslo, is there a like secret handshake that one could do in order to see some of this stuff, or how does one get into this club?
Okay. I think you'll just have to be patient and read the articles when we publish them.
We'll be waiting for that quite eagerly.
Yeah. And having said that, there's also other things, other inscriptions unrelated to this to look forward to.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
okay.
It's been a good few years for runes the last few years.
Other very old stuff, or?
Fairly well. It will be in the Elder Futhark. I can say that much, and I can say that much else. Well, I can say that it will make headlines, and I think a lot of people will think that what they will get to know in March. I think it'll be mid-March, maybe, so it's not that long. It will be of equal wildness compared to this find. It will be
Wow.
very, very interesting for a lot of people.
Something else from Norway?
No, this one is from Denmark.
Interesting. Okay. So finds are being made all over the place.
Yeah. It's incredible to have found this many interesting things in such a compromise. Well, it's been over the past 3 years, is it? When was the country called when the Överbystein was found? It's probably in 2018.
I think it's right.
And then we got the treasure hoard from Vindelev, and now this Svingerud stone.
Well, if you want to come back and talk to us when this next batch of information comes out, I will probably still be here trying to get good information about this out to the public without, weird agendas and mysticism. It is sometimes a losing battle, as you know.
Oh yes, you can't go into all the discussions that you'll find on the internet. It's impossible. Yeah.
No. Well, and even the mass media, even when they don't mysticize it, they they turn it into, well, like CNN leading with mysterious inscription. I mean, it makes it sound like the Ark of the Covenant is inscribed with runes or something. It's so interesting, but they always have to kind of put it into these mystery thriller movie style headlines.
Yeah, it's like a lot of people in the many types of media don't understand that this will actually sell itself. The find of this magnitude doesn't need more anything, because it is what it is, and that in itself is so incredible and amazing that it'll sell itself.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, I maybe I speak for you here, maybe I don't. I certainly speak for myself when I say I don't care if that final rune and that 8-letter sequence is G or N. It's fascinating either way, and the question doesn't have to be resolved if it can't be, right? But it's just fascinating to know, someone is writing something that we can actually pretty much understand that long ago in Norway. That's awesome to me.
Yes, it is mind blowing and mind twisting and mind boggling, all in the same time.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good closing chapter to this one particular conversation, especially since you've taken so much time on a day you didn't intend to. Let us have you back for the next big reveal. I would love to have you come and talk to us and answer our questions again. Everyone agrees. They're all saying so in the chat. So.
Good.
But yeah, thank you so much for your time and for this information and for just the treat of being able to pick your brain about it.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Always happy to talk about interesting stuff to other knowledgeable people. It makes the conversations so much more interesting.
Well, thank you. And we'll look forward to having you back hopefully soon, and best of fortunes to you and the rest of the team working on this, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next.
Thank you very much.
Well,
all right.
All the best, everybody.